My daughter texted me, "Don't come here for Christmas. We need privacy from your dramas." My son replied nothing. I stared at my phone screen, rereading those words over and over again, completely certain that there must be some ridiculous mistake, that I had simply misunderstood. Then, obeying a cold, unconscious impulse, I did something I never thought I would do in my entire life. I opened my banking app, went to the transfer settings, and canceled every single automatic payment I had been dutifully sending them for years. All of them vanished from the system in seconds. The next morning, they were both standing at my door. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a good mother became a woman who finally chose herself. My name is Jennifer Morrison, and for 62 years, I truly believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing absolutely everything for your children. 35 of those years I lived by this principle as an absolute truth. Right now, I am sitting here in my kitchen in the suburbs of Cleveland, in the exact same kitchen where my late husband David and I raised our 2 children. In the exact same kitchen where he suddenly collapsed 7 years ago while I was cooking his favorite roast. In the exact same kitchen where I spent countless nights completely alone after he passed, staring into the dark and wondering where exactly I made a mistake. The December sun sets early here in Ohio. From my window, I can see the garden David planted with his own hands 20 years ago. The roses he loved so much are dormant now, frozen and waiting for spring. Sometimes looking at them, I wonder if I have been in a deep winter sleep all these years too. Let me tell you about the text message that changed absolutely everything. It came 3 days ago on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished my watercolor class at the community center, a new hobby I started to fill the empty hours of loneliness. My phone vibrated on the table as I was cleaning my brushes. It was a message from Sarah, my 34-year-old daughter. She wrote that they needed to talk about Christmas, that she and Kyle had decided they needed family time this year, just them and the kids. She called me needy and demanding, saying I was always calling and trying to make everything about myself, and told me not to call or text for the holidays. I sat down hard on my rigid kitchen chair. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. Needy? Demanding? I had called her exactly twice that week. Once to ask if Olivia needed anything for her dance recital, and once to see if they had received the check I sent to help cover their mortgage payment. That was what she called needy. I waited for Ethan, my 31-year-old son, to call or text, to say something in the family group chat where he surely saw Sarah's cruel message. Nothing. Hours passed, then a full day. His silence felt like agreement, like a betrayal, just as sharp as his sister's words. That night, I did not sleep at all. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. David's side of the bed was cold and empty, just as it had been for 7 years. The old house creaked around me, every sound amplified by my loneliness. What had I done wrong? Let me tell you about David, because understanding the man he was helps you understand exactly how I ended up in this position. David Morrison was the steadiest, most grounded man I ever knew. We met back in 1983 at a hospital fundraiser. I was 21, working as a medical secretary. He was 23, just starting his career as an electrical engineer. He accidentally spilled punch on my white dress and spent the next hour sincerely apologizing, trying to fix his mistake. We were married within a year. He used to hold my hand tightly across the dinner table when the kids were teenagers and say that the children needed to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, that our job was to raise adults, not permanent children. I always nodded in agreement, accepting the principle in theory. But in practice, the moment I saw my babies struggling or stumbling, I physically could not stop myself from reaching out to catch them. David passed away 7 years ago this past April. It happened suddenly, without any warning. One moment he was in the garage changing the oil in Sarah's car because her husband Kyle could not be bothered to learn, and Sarah had asked for help. The next moment I was frantically dialing 911, watching my husband's face turn gray. It was a massive, merciless stroke. The funeral was on a Thursday. Sarah and Kyle drove in from their house 40 minutes away, and Ethan flew in from his apartment downtown. They stayed with me for exactly 3 days. 3 days. I still clearly remember standing in our bedroom on that third evening, folding David's clothes to donate. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down right on the floor, surrounded by his flannel shirts that still held the faint scent of his aftershave. Sarah knocked on the doorframe and told me they had to head out because the kids had school on Monday, and they could not disrupt their routine. She asked if I understood, all while checking her phone. She was always checking her phone. What could I tell her? That I was terrified of being alone in this huge house? That every room echoed with David's absence? That I physically needed my daughter? I suppressed my feelings and quietly told them to drive safely. Ethan left that same evening, mentioning he had already taken bereavement leave from work and promising to call during the weekend. He did not call that weekend, or the next. That was when it started. The crushing, paralyzing fear that I would lose them too. The fear that if I was not useful, if I was not needed, if I was not constantly giving them something, they would drift away entirely and leave me in absolute emptiness. So I made myself useful. It began innocently enough. About 6 months after David died, Sarah called me crying, saying Kyle had been out of work for 3 weeks. They were behind on the mortgage, and she was terrified of losing the house. My heart broke instantly. I asked how much she needed, and she said $1,500 would catch them up. I sent it that very day, transferring it directly from my account to hers. 2 days later, she called again, crying with relief, calling me the best mother in the world. Those words were like a drug to my loneliness. 3 months later, Ethan called saying he was in a jam because his car needed a new transmission and he had no cash, asking for help just this once. I sent him $3,000. Gradually, this became a pattern, then a routine, and finally, an expectation. Sarah started calling every month for the mortgage, dance classes, tutoring, medical bills, or car repairs, always using the same phrase about how she wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I eventually suggested setting up automatic monthly transfers of $1,500. Ethan's situation became identical with rent increases, student loan payments, emergency dental work, and car payments, so I set up a monthly transfer of $1,000 for him too. Beyond these fixed amounts, there were always extras, emergencies, expensive birthday gifts, and Christmas presents that maxed out my credit cards. When their washing machine broke, I bought them a top-of-the-line replacement. When Ethan's laptop crashed, I replaced it within days. When Olivia needed braces, I paid for them because insurance did not cover everything. I kept telling myself this was what mothers did, that this was love, and that David would want me to take care of our family. But lately, a tiny voice in the back of my mind had started to whisper, wondering if he would really want this, if he would want me to risk my own security for their comfort. Thanksgiving should have been my first real warning, but I was too desperate to see them to notice the obvious. I spent 3 days preparing a massive dinner, cooking the turkey by David's secret recipe, making everything from scratch, and polishing our good wedding china. Sarah and her family were supposed to arrive at 1 o'clock, but showed up at 3:15, blaming traffic. Sarah barely looked at me as she walked past into the living room, immediately pulling out her phone. Kyle just nodded at me like I was a doorman and headed straight to the television to watch football in David's favorite chair. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later with a quick, distracted hug, apologizing for losing track of time. The only bright spot was my grandchildren, 10-year-old Olivia and 7-year-old Noah, who ran to hug me. We sat down to eat at 4 o'clock, and the turkey was dry from waiting in the oven for 3 hours. Nobody noticed, or at least nobody mentioned it. I tried to start a conversation, asking Olivia about school and dance, but she just shrugged without looking up from her phone. A 10-year-old sitting with a phone at the holiday dinner table. Sarah did not look up from her own device either. I tried asking Ethan about work, but he gave a one-word answer while scrolling through sports scores. Kyle sat silently, watching the game on his phone, propped against a water glass. The only person who talked to me was little Noah, who told me all about his school play and his friends. I caught every single word like a lifeline. At 6:30, Ethan checked his watch and said he had to leave to meet friends. I asked if he had to go so soon, my voice sounding more desperate than I intended, but he just grabbed his jacket, thanked me for dinner, and asked for leftovers in takeout containers. He arrived at 3:20 and stayed for less than 3.5 hours, spending most of it on his phone. Sarah and her family left at 7. As they were walking out the door, Sarah stopped and mentioned that the automatic transfer had not hit her account yet, saying she wanted to make sure I did not forget. Not a thank you for the beautiful dinner. Not an I love you. Not a single question about how I was holding up during the holidays without Dad. Just a question about the money. I told her I would check on it tomorrow. After they left, I stood alone in the dining room surrounded by dirty dishes and piles of uneaten food. I had made enough to feed 15 people, and the 4 adults had barely made a dent. Right there in the kitchen, still holding the serving spoon, I broke down and cried because my heart was breaking. That night, after cleaning up the dishes, I could not sleep. The house felt too big and too quiet. I went to the closet and pulled down the old box filled with cards and letters my children had sent me over the years. I sat on my bed and opened it, looking at the old hand-drawn Mother's Day cards from when they were little. I traced the shaky kindergarten handwriting where Sarah had written that I was the best mom in the world. I wondered where that little girl had gone. As they grew older, the cards changed to generic store-bought ones, then to belated high school cards, and then to brief college phone calls. After David died, everything shifted to digital e-cards that took 30 seconds to send. Last Mother's Day, Sarah just made a public post on Facebook tagging all mothers without even acknowledging me specifically, and Ethan forgot entirely, sending a text 2 days later. I found one card from Sarah from 2 years ago that I had saved because it seemed heartfelt at the time, thanking me for always being there when they needed me. Reading it now, I saw the brutal truth. Always there when they needed me. When they needed money, free babysitting, or someone to listen to their problems. But when had they last noticed that I might need something too? I took a photo of the card with my phone, driven by a deep instinct that I might need evidence someday, though I did not yet know of what. The week after Thanksgiving, I tried to push my doubts away, telling myself they were just busy with their own lives. But I dreaded a lonely Christmas. The thought of sitting in this empty house on Christmas morning was unbearable. So I texted Sarah a light, casual message offering to spend the holiday together, promising to make Dad's favorite prime rib. I waited for a response for 3 days, and then the cruel text message arrived, telling me I was needy and demanding and ordering me to leave them alone for the holidays. I read it over and over, my hands shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. I waited for Ethan to defend me in the group chat, but hours passed in silence. The next afternoon, I texted him directly, asking if he had seen what his sister wrote. He replied that he had, and added that maybe Sarah had a point because I really did call a lot. It felt like a physical slap in the face. My own son was siding against me. That night was when everything changed. At 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I went into David's old office. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. Guided by a cold urge to face the truth, I exported my financial statements going back 5 years and created a spreadsheet, using the budgeting skills David had taught me decades ago. The numbers that emerged made me physically ill. The automatic payments alone totaled $90,000 to Sarah and $60,000 to Ethan over 60 months. Then came all the emergencies. The house down payment assistance, the appliances, the dental work, the car repairs, the electronics, and the expensive holiday gifts. When I finally totaled everything up, I had to check the number 3 times. It was $246,600 in 5 years. I sat back in David's chair, my cold coffee untouched, my hands shaking. That sum represented 78% of David's life insurance money. The money he had worked so hard for and saved specifically to ensure my financial security in my old age. I could hear his voice in my head, warning me years ago that there was a difference between helping and enabling, and that my fear of losing the kids was making me give them everything they wanted instead of what they needed to grow up. I had argued with him back then, but sitting there at dawn staring at the spreadsheet, I finally understood the brutal truth. David had been right. I had been paying for their love, and they had been selling it. The realization brought a wave of cold, clarifying anger. I had raised them better than this. I opened my banking app, found the recurring transfers, and deliberately canceled both Sarah's and Ethan's automatic payments. Then I opened my text messages, found Sarah's cruel Christmas text, typed one single word, "Okay," and pressed send. I turned off my phone completely. For the first time in years, the house was completely silent, and in that silence I felt an unexpected sense of peace. I slept deeply for 4 hours. When I woke up, I kept the phone off and began going through David's old filing cabinets. Near the bottom, I found a folder labeled as important for my eyes only. Inside was a letter written in David's handwriting, instructing me to open it if he was gone. And I was struggling. My hands shook as I read his words. He wrote that he knew me and knew I would probably be giving the kids too much money out of loneliness and fear. He reminded me that I was enough just as I was, not for my money or what I could do for others, but for my heart and my kindness. He wrote that if the kids could not see my value without my wallet, they did not deserve me, and told me not to set myself on fire to keep others warm. He ended by telling me to be strong, to let the kids stand on their own feet, and asked me to finally go to Ireland, a trip we had always dreamed of taking together. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. He had protected me even from beyond the grave. I folded the letter carefully, put it in my pocket, and turned on my phone. It immediately lit up with 37 missed calls and 16 urgent text messages from both of them. I did not read them yet. Instead, I called David's old attorney, Samuel Bradford. I explained everything to him, the years of money, the text messages, and the total amount. Samuel listened gravely and told me that this pattern qualified as severe financial exploitation of an elderly person under Ohio law. He explained that giving money under emotional coercion and threats of isolation is not the same as giving freely. He asked about my health, and I admitted I had high blood pressure and arthritis, and that I had actually skipped a few doses of my expensive medications in the past, just to make sure I had enough money to cover Sarah's sudden financial emergencies. Samuel told me we needed to act immediately to protect my remaining assets. He advised me to completely rewrite my will, making their inheritance strictly conditional, or moving the assets into a protected trust for my grandchildren that the parents could never touch. He also told me to document every single future interaction in a logbook in case we needed a protection order against them, and advised me to assign a financial power of attorney to a neutral party so the children could never try to claim I was incompetent to gain control of my estate. After hanging up, I felt a sharp sense of clarity. My phone buzzed with another furious text from Sarah, demanding to know why I had canceled the transfers when her mortgage was due. I replied with a single word, "No." She instantly texted back, accusing me of having an emotional breakdown and punishing them, arguing that I had Dad's insurance and was fine. I looked around my kitchen at the leaking pipe I had been ignoring and the property tax bill due in January. Most of David's insurance money was already gone, given to children who thought I was demanding. I texted her that I had to go and turned off the phone again. I spent the next 3 days completely ignoring the constant ringing of my phone, saving their angry, manipulative, and desperate voicemails into a folder and logging every contact attempt in a notebook. On the 4th day, I returned to Samuel's office to sign the new legal documents, officially removing their direct access to my estate. The very next morning, just as my instincts predicted, Sarah and Ethan drove up to my house together, their faces tight with fury. I watched them walk up the path past David's dormant roses. I did not open the front door. Instead, I opened the upstairs window and looked down at them. Sarah shouted at me to open the door and fix the accounts immediately, while Ethan asked me to talk normally, saying they had changed their minds about Christmas, and I could come if I just restored the money. I looked at them and realized there was no love in their faces, only the panic of losing a financial resource. I told them calmly that the automatic transfers were gone forever, that they would have to support themselves, and that my lawyer had documented all their harassment. I told them that any further demands would be treated as financial abuse, and ordered them to leave my property. Ethan realized first that the old, fearful mother was gone, replaced by a woman with steel in her voice. He pulled his sister back to the car, and they drove away. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the airline website on my screen. I booked a one-way ticket to Ireland. The winter cold of Cleveland was fading behind me, and for the first time in my life, I was stepping into the warmth of my own future.